Welcome to the Filmmaker's Playbook. My name is Jason Branagan and this is a podcast all about filmmaking. On today's show, I talk to cinematographer JJ Rolfe. JJ's feature film credits include Dublin Old School, The Bright Side and Deadly Cuts. His TV work includes Kin, Smother, Blackshore, Witness Number 3, The Night Caller and Harry Wild, amongst others. In our conversation, we discussed JJ's time at IADT, what he learned as an editor, bringing challenge to your work, the importance of surrounding yourself with a great team, pitching for jobs, dealing with rejection, and much more. I hope you enjoyed today's episode. Thank you for listening. JJ Rolfe, thank you for joining me. How are you?
I'm great. Thanks for having me. A pleasure to be here.
A pleasure to have you. I'm looking forward to digging into things. So I would love to start with IADT and the National Film School. So you graduated there in 2007?
Yeah.
What was it that led you to the National Film School in the first place?
Yeah, so I originally started out on a completely different path. So I studied a thing called manufacturing engineering and management science in Trinity. I kind of grew up in a house. My dad's an artist and my mum's an architect. And from growing up, like being an artist is not really it's not really a very stable financial footing. So my parents went the kind of, for two very kind of artistic and liberal people, were like, you need to get a real job. So I went to Trinity and started studying this kind of course that basically is a hybrid of engineering and business. And on the first day, they put up a picture of a Rolls-Royce jet engine, and they kind of put it up. It was a schematic plan, and they were like, you're going to know what every single part does and how it's made, and then how they all come together to get the market. And I was like, I don't really think this is for me. So I did that for 2 years, and then it was kind of, it just really wasn't my jam. So I left and I took a year out, and kind of because I'd grown up with kind of creative parents, I'd always been really into photography, and weirdly kind of video editing was kind of available. I had a computer and I'd kind of shoot some little videos and cut them together. So I kind of made a very rudimentary show reel and kind of tried to get into film school, mainly because it was a way of kind of, it was the most obvious outlet I could think of for kind of what I enjoyed, which was actually editing. So I had some photos. I had this little thing that I'd shot and cut together, and I got in, which was great. So that's how I kind of started there. There wasn't it wasn't the most natural path to end up in film school, but once I got in, I figured out that I really liked it. So yeah, and then cinematography came because I started off originally kind of, I was like, right, I want to take some photos and I want to be able to edit, and I want to be an editor because that feels stable and it feels like something that, it feels like a job. And it was the kind of tangible job that I understood just because I'd seen editors, and I was like, okay, I'm going to do this. And then I think we were in second year or first year, I can't remember which, but Robbie Ryan came in to give a talk, and he kind of showed some stuff because he'd gone to Dún Laoghaire and left. And the head of course, when we were there, we were just walking. It was a talk for the third years and fourth years. And Anne O'Leary, who was the head of the course, saw a couple of us walking down the corridor and was like, get in here. This guy's brilliant. So she dragged us all in and sat down. And I was like, oh, yeah, that's what I want to do. So it was kind of Robbie coming in and giving that talk, and showing his work. And that would have been really early on. It was kind of before he'd done all the Andrea Arnold stuff. And I was like, that looks really fucking cool. So that's kind of what set me on the path to kind of be a DP.
Two questions off the back of that. One is, did you have a large affinity for film prior to going in? And then the second one being, what was it about that moment, or what Robbie was showing you or talking about, that made you go, yes, this?
So yeah, I wasn't like a massive cinema buff, or at least I didn't think I was, because there was people that were in my orbit who were like massively into films. I just really enjoyed watching films. I was more genuinely really more into photography and like looking at photo books and kind of understanding that aspect of stuff. So yeah, it was kind of more the storytelling aspect of it, if that makes any sense. So I was like, I like images, and now going in and seeing kind of Robbie talking about stuff and showing bits and bobs and going, okay, you're actually using imagery to tell story on top of the story that's there. I was like, that just seems really, really, that's exciting. So adding that kind of, so like looking at kind of great street photography and reading what the image is saying really quickly. And, you know, a picture of something is not necessarily the story that it's telling. And then it was kind of the first, I thought, like maybe I was just really naive or really young or both, or just, I hadn't really made that connection in my head. Because it was never really what I was looking at. I was always looking at the story, and then I was like, okay, so they're doing the same thing great photography does in really, really good and well thought through cinematography. So that was where the kind of where it came to me, if that makes sense. It wasn't like a light bulb went off on the top of my head. I was just like, okay. And it took a little bit of time for me to figure out the reason why it kind of resonated with me.
You kind of have that moment you decide, yes, cinematography is where I want to spend my time. When it came then to graduating and leaving IADT, your IMDb tells us you made, there's probably 12 or 13 shorts over a couple of years. So I was wondering what life was like post graduation and what making those shorts were teaching you and how they began to shape the cinematographer you were becoming.
Yeah, so when I went to IADT, you did it was a 4 year course, but you did 3 years and you got an ordinary level degree. Then you had to reapply to do the fourth year and you specialized in something, and that got you your higher level degree. So everybody does that. And I didn't specialize in my final year as a cinematographer. I specialized in editing. Because in the weird period of the third year grad film, so at the time, all 24 people in the year made a graduation film, and everybody crewed on everyone else's pieces. I shot some, and then it got to the point where it was like everything was shot, and it got really quiet and really boring. And I was like, well, I need to do something, because I think because it was the second bite of the cherry for me in terms of college, I wanted to really maximize every moment of it and get as much out of it as I possibly could. So I started kind of cutting some stuff, and I was like, oh yeah, I really enjoy doing this as well. And the editing lecturer was somebody that was like really kind of, he was great, Doggy Dorn, and he was like, you should come and do fourth year as and specialize in editing, because I'll teach you how to tell stories. It's like the shooting of it and the technical aspect of it. You'll figure that out later, and you know a lot of it already. But if you come and learn storytelling through putting shots together, it'll benefit you as a DP. And I was kind of like, yeah, but I really like shooting stuff. He was like, don't worry about that. You'll still be able to, you'll figure that out and you'll be able to do stuff. But we're going to talk to you about story and we'll teach you. And it was kind of, in many ways, it was the best decision I ever made, because I learned how to become a kind of editor, and I learned the technical aspect of it, and it kind of filled my time quite a lot, which was great. And I was just still able to kind of shoot little bits and bobs and satisfy that urge within myself. But what it also meant was when I left college, I was able to monetize that skill, which was really great, because a lot of people want to shoot stuff or be directors, but there's not a huge amount of people that kind of want to sit in the dark and put it all together. So it's a very useful skill for me to have. So when I left, myself and a really good mate of mine, we ended up making a weekly magazine TV show about greyhound racing, which is a horrible sport, and it's a kind of morally dark moment for me. That was how I kind of made a living, but it was very, very useful at the time, because what it did was it paid us enough money that then I was able to take time to go and shoot those short films, because if I was just waiting for the phone to ring to go and shoot stuff without any other financial avenue, it would have been a really, I wouldn't have been able to do it. It was just not feasible. So it was great to have that kind of job that was still, and I learned a huge amount kind of going off on my own and shooting these things. And the company that I was doing that for got more and more jobs kind of covering sport all over Europe. So I'd go away and do that, and we'd be kind of shooting news packages at away football matches and cutting that and sending it back for it to go on air. And that was a huge, massive learning experience as well, of like shooting something that needs to go out in 15 minutes and you're cutting it. So when you're, I remember one of the first ones I ever did was in, we went to Montenegro for like Trapattoni's second away match after playing Georgia in Mines. So I flew into Mines, and then I was like taken over in Podgorica in Montenegro and went out to shoot like the news package, and got back and started cut and had to ingest it all into an Avid in the back of a van and cut it together. And it was like 20 to 6. And it was like the news was on at 6, obviously, and the sports news was on at 6:30. Got into cutting it. Antonio Donahue, who was the soccer correspondent, was like, "Where's the shots of this and that and that?" And I was like, "I didn't get those." And he was like, "What are you gonna do?" I was like, "I don't know. Is that a problem?" He's like, "Yeah, it's a big problem. You've got like 40 minutes. It's like running around to get a shot of a bus pulling up to try and cover it." And it was a massive lesson of like, if you need to shoot it, make sure you shoot it, or else you're getting your future self in trouble. But then that feeds on to everybody else within a production in trouble. So that was a huge amount of learning that I was able to take into those shorts, about how you can cover stuff and be efficient with it, and how you can kind of do all that. But the things that aren't with the shorts were kind of similar. Like, it was just about being resourceful. And like, you don't have a huge amount, so how do you tell the story with the least amount of stuff? And everything else that comes after that is wonderful. But if you can get it all done with not very much, you're in a really good position. So that was kind of the learning of that. But it was the freedom to be able to do it from that other job that was, I found really, really beneficial. So that was kind of how I ended up doing all those.
I love that you spent that time in an edit suite, because I am going to guess, and correct me if I am wrong here, that in terms of you going out and then working on, let's say, shorts in particular, where there isn't lots of money, you also have an eye on the edit. Do you shoot for the edit? I know obviously it will depend on what directors you're working with and how they want to work as well, but I feel like you must always have your eye on that then in a different way as a result of all that time cutting.
I think it's something that everybody should be thinking of. I think it's like one of the most like, when you're making films, you're not working in a vacuum of your own department. I guess that's the difference between like just kind of pointing a camera at something, or if that's your sole thing, you're not. And it's kind of part of my thinking of how things get made, which is kind of coming more clear the more I do it, is that if everybody's kind of pulling the same direction, you're making something that's much, much better because of that. And you're kind of, everybody's then a filmmaker, because you're all thinking about, obviously the director is thinking about everything from a much more holistic position. But if you're thinking about what I can do that will help the cut, or what I can do that will help locations, right, that kind of stuff, we're all pulling the same way. You're all kind of being filmmakers. But yeah, that kind of edit knowledge, it lets you know exactly what you're able to get away with, and what the minimum is that you can get away with. But it also, it gives you a really good instinctual grounding of, if this has got to work, which I haven't known it in a different way. But if I didn't have that knowledge, I'd find it really, really difficult to do what I do. But like, I highly recommend, like, if someone's going to like direct their first short or shoot their first short, even if you get an editor, just as like a very worthwhile thing of like actually sitting down with the rushes yourself and trying to put it together. Like I say, if you're doing it in a vacuum without ever having that knowledge of what it's like to try and put those shots together, you're always going to shoot those shots. And then until you go, oh, that doesn't cut, you'll go, oh, okay, right. And that's how you kind of, for me anyway, that's how I learn, is by kind of making those mistakes and realizing, right, shit, that doesn't work, but this could work. But also, what for me as well, within kind of jobs that I have shot, is I know I know how to kind of structure a scene with the director that will kind of only cut that way, which can be really, really helpful. If you have a massive amount of intent behind how you want to do it, you can give a lot of things, but know which way it's going to end up.
Basically, not shooting donkey load of coverage, so it just goes to someone else to cut a scene, and there's not necessarily real ownership over what you wanted it to be.
Yeah, I think when you kind of get down into the nuts and bolts of it, if you're kind of, when you're shooting something and you're kind of working towards your initial core idea of what it is, that yeah, you want to, it's not even about ownership, or it's not ego, it's just you have an idea of what this should be. And if you just hose it down with a load of mid shots and close-ups, 3 masters and 5 2 shots, like you can cut it any which way, and any of the intent about how you're, I learned I was taught in film school that like every shot needs to have a reason for its existence, and that because we learned on film originally, every frame was really expensive, and when you're in college, that means quite a lot. So like blowing through a load of shots that you know are never going to get used or shouldn't be used just doesn't, obviously there are occasions where that's required because sometimes you're making TV and you need coverage and you need to be able to pace things up or slow things down, and you need to be able to change the story, and some scene there might not work and you need something here that, so you can, there's loads of reasons why you do it. But if you're approaching it in a kind of filmmaking way, you want to curate what is shot, because every frame is kind of important. And it's also, it's not just the importance of kind of the ownership of it, it's also kind of time management. If you can get out of a scene by shooting 3 shots, it means you can spend a lot more investigating what the actor's performance is, as opposed to shooting 9 shots. And really, if you can tell it with 3 shots, then why are you doing 9? Like, if you can effectively kind of give it intent, and maybe like 1 shot's a mid shot that turns into a close up, or you block it in a way that the actor moves into that, and that, like, that's interesting, and that's kind of where it becomes slightly more, you're making something that is cinema as opposed to just kind of product, for want of a better term.
I love 2 words you used was intent and curate, the idea of like curating every single image and every single frame. I would be very pro not shooting coverage, but I recently read this thing was actually in the Ed Zwick's book, and he just kind of mentions that like the gift of coverage is it does let you rewrite in the edit if you have enough. But I don't think he's a man who necessarily rinses scenes with coverage. They're still very intentional images. He just maybe gives himself those 1 or 2 extra shots or close-ups just to maybe help pace a scene up or something.
It's funny, like the word coverage has kind of gotten a bit of it's got a bad rap over the last while, and there's kind of, I've worked with directors who are like, I'm not shooting coverage. You're like, but don't, if you look at what the word means, it means you are photographing the scene in the way that tells the story. And sometimes that might need 15 shots because there's lots of shit going on. But that's not a bad thing. You can't just go around trying to hoover everything up in a oneer, because that doesn't work either. So like, coverage isn't a negative thing for me anyway, but just kind of hosing it down, like rocking around with a camera on your shoulder and just pointing at everything that's moving is not really kind of, that's fine if that's what you want to do, but it doesn't, I found that the things that I enjoy watching don't do that. I think it gives me a perspective on it tells me the story, it's not, you're being guided through a narrative. It's not, you're not reading a book when you watch a film. You're not reading a script. You're watching what's being told to you, and the camera has a huge amount of power to be able to narrate that in where it's supposed to be, as opposed to just kind of, oh, you need this shot of the phone because the phone's about to ring. It's like, well, no, they're just going to talk on the phone, and the phone doesn't matter. I also don't necessarily need to see the other people talking on the phone because it's about what's being said. I don't even need to hear it. That's filmmaking, and like great filmmakers do that. And like, I think you need to trust the audience that they will understand what you're trying to tell them. And sometimes, you need to shoot lots of shots to have options afterwards, and that's totally fine. but you just need to be able to think about those. You know, you want to be able to stand over each one of those frames and go, yeah, that's a good one. Happy with that.
That idea of being like really judicious with like when you're shooting certain things like close-ups, and avoiding that idea of just, you kind of described it, that we're going to cover it on the wide, we get in for mids, get in for close-ups, and just that kind of paint by numbers version of what maybe coverage, what people think of as coverage, which I agree. And I love that you said it, that the word has got a bad rap.
The word has, and it's like, it's not I don't think that's right. You know, I think that if it needs the shots, you shoot them. You shouldn't be kind of fighting against. And also, like, I always kind of there's a good proverb, which is like, if one person says you look sick, think about it. If two people say you look sick, go and lie down. So if you're ever shooting something and like the producer comes over and goes, you need another shot, I don't know what's going on. And then if you go, oh yeah, okay, yeah, I haven't really thought about that. I think it's really important to listen to those things, because when you're making something, you're in the script and you've been sitting with it for ages. You prepped it, you and the director and the first have talked about it loads, and you know what you're going to do, and you get into it. And then when you get there, some things don't work, but also you know the material so well that you're like, yeah, now I get what's going on. But sometimes you need an outside voice to come in and go, actually, I do think we need a shot of that phone because I don't really know what's happening. You know, it's important to listen to those things, because the thing of it is, when you shoot it, more often than not, it will get used. But sometimes you can look at it 10 weeks later and go, yeah, actually, we don't need that. I know exactly what's going on. Or, I'm really glad we got that because you really need it.
When you were shooting sports and different things while building your career and reputation as a DOP, at what point were you able to begin to transition away from the more kind of, job aspect of shooting to become a DOP full time?
I don't know, is the honest answer. I think I'm now there. No, I probably am. Yeah, like, I guess kind of COVID really kicked that other aspect of kind of work to touch. It was kind of a gradual phasing out. So I was getting more, I think it was 2012 myself. So I'd known Dave Tynan from college, and I'd actually known him from before college. His parents were really good friends with my parents, so I'd known him since we were very young kids. And he was the year behind me in Dunleary, and we were mates. And he'd written this kind of poem called Just Saying, and he had before that kind of commercial representation, and we'd kind of been doing, I think we were doing some kind of lower end commercials together, and we made a film called Just Saying, which was a very, very lo-fi, but the writing was so good, and the cast were like, it was Emma Kerwin, and it just came out really, I think, a really good time. And that kind of kick-started Dave, and therefore my commercial career, which was really great, and lovely. But it kind of set us on a path together. So I've kind of done most of the things that Dave has done over the last, well, it's just kind of recently that where they've landed at times where I haven't been available to do some stuff with them. But that really kind of, so 2012 on, the curves were kind of crossing over a little bit. So I was doing kind of more commercials with him and a couple of different directors. And then that obviously then kind of replaced, in terms of income, my ability to kind of go and do more shorts, and kind of shorts that had money behind them now. We made Rockmount together. I can't remember what year it was.
Maybe 2014. You guys won an IFTA for Best Short Film in 2015.
That sounds about right. So yeah, I think we would have shot it in 2014. And Dave had been and that led on to him kind of developing Dublin Old School with Emmett. And we made Heartbreak at the start of 2017, I want to say. And then I won the IFTA in 2017, I believe. Yeah, it did. Um, and that really kind of heartbreak was was kind of not a proof of concept for Dublin Old School, because it was a very different thing, but it was kind of a, let's get Emma and Dave to do something. And it was the same kind of core creative team behind it as a kind of thing to try and get the film board involved, or Screen Ireland as they are now, involved in Dublin Old School, the feature film, which ultimately did then happen, which was great. And I kind of naively thought that I'd make that and then everything would be amazing. It took a little while after that for some more films to come in, which were all kind of 2019. So that was kind of my path as things were happening. But it was the one thing I say, like, I think everything takes a long time. I would have thought when back in 2012, I was ready to do the jobs that I'm now doing. But the reality of it is I wasn't. I think this industry has a really good way of, like a kind of filter to stop you getting from the next step. Even though you think you're ready, you still have to learn some stuff to get there. And then, so there's a ladder that you're constantly kind of climbing. I don't think you ever know when you're at the top or where in the world you are.
Yeah, I think the industry has a great way of keeping you humble.
I think that's always a really, really important thing. Like whenever I go on set, I think there's like huge. I've been really lucky to work with some really great kind of first ADs, and I always kind of go, you know way more about what I'm doing than I do, and it's great. Like work a lot, yeah. Like Jer, who you've had on, he's been on huge shows, and it's like, oh yeah, so what would you do there? So it's great to have him in your corner, kind of whispering stuff in your ear.
When Just Saying came out 2012, like big cultural moment, real zeitgeisty as well. I remember it vividly. After that, you mentioned that's where maybe you start moving into more of a commercial landscape. And I was wondering how working in commercials then began to maybe help you grow and continue to learn. One thing I think from a director's perspective, maybe, who, speaking from my own experience where I haven't gone into commercials in any big way, and you're making drama shorts and you're working in certain types of television, but you kind of miss, I think, an aspect of the commercial world where you get to experiment maybe with like more expensive toys that aren't always around. And yeah, I'd love to just know how maybe what you were able to get out of that commercial world that you then kind of moved into.
Yeah, commercials I think are kind of funny. I think the landscape of them has completely changed over the last kind of couple of years, really. They're definitely not what they were 20 years ago, in terms of budgets and in terms of kind of toys and in terms of things. Like the biggest thing, I guess, like you do get to try stuff, and I don't necessarily know if that's from a directorial point of view, if that's as much as it might be perceived to be. I think what you really get, and for me, anyway, and definitely, I think for directors that I've done them with, what you really get, like the commercials crew are kind of dominantly people that mostly do commercials. They obviously do drama and they do other stuff, but they mostly kind of stick in commercials. That's a sweeping generalization, but what you do get is you get top, really, really top tier crew. And that's a really, really valuable thing. So if you're coming from kind of shorts where you're getting kind of mates to help you out and kind of, you don't really have a gaffer and and you're kind of beg, borrowing and stealing and you're kind of picking up stuff in your car to go and shoot in Roscommon. And it's like, oh, it's a 6 a.m. call and it's going to wrap at 2 a.m. Jeez, that's great. I'd have to go home. Excellent. But whereas when you're in a commercial and you're like, oh wow, all of a sudden there's trucks and there's Jennies and there's like, oh wow, we have a location manager. This is so that's kind of the step, I think. So it's stuff that's quite now in a drama world is all quite normal. But the transition from kind of short films into this, it's not like you're rocking in to do like a butter commercial and there's a 50-foot techno crane in the kitchen. It's all kind of the same stuff, but the resource of crew power is a lot more present. But I know that over the last couple of years, that's changed a little bit because budgets are getting smaller and smaller. I think the kind of, for a better term, the genie is out of the bottle in terms of if you're able to go and make a kind of short film for 10 grand that's 10 minutes long, and a commercial company comes to you and goes, well, we've got this 30-second thing and we're going to give you 10 grand. You go, oh, well, my last thing was 10 minutes. So I think the genie being out of the bottle is regard to that. So there's a lot of kind of eagerness of people to get involved with them. That's kind of driving the resource level down a little bit in terms of what people are willing to pay for.
Okay.
But like I said, like I did one last week where we had, cranes and underwater stuff, but it was very much for that specific thing. So they do happen. And it's great to kind of do that because it's so funny, like walking off a thing where you're doing like 7 pages a day and there's 8 cast and you're going on to a commercial and it's like, yeah, we got to get 15 seconds today. But I definitely like the thing that kind of I learned personally from doing them, apart from the kind of crew, but in terms of my own practice, was how to kind of listen more. Because a lot of it's like when you're making TV, you get notes and they come back a couple of weeks later, and it's kind of frustrating. When you're doing a commercial, the client and the agency are there, and the notes are instant, and that can kind of slow stuff down. And if you let it frustrate you and frustrate the process, you shouldn't be doing commercials. If you can smile and kind of go, okay, right, because that's if you're making TV, the studio and the network are the people that are paying for it. If you're making a commercial, it's the client and agency. So it's a similar thing. Not that TV is like making an ad. But you learn to be able to deal with notes and not have a total meltdown, for want of a better word.
We'll come back to notes. Let me see whether I have understood using commercials as a stepping stone, maybe taught you or made you more comfortable on those bigger kind of quote unquote professional set environments.
Yeah, you get used to having that level of crew behind you and like, oh, okay, right. There's, like a generator truck. Not like if you do a short, you never really have, without that resource, you'd never know that you need to be able to park a 30-foot long truck somewhere. And then you do one commercial that is essentially normally, a lot of them are kind of 2 people in a kitchen having a conversation. So like you get very good at lining that and knowing what that space is, which is a lot of shorts or kitchen sink dramas as well. So there's similarities within that, but just being able to know what that resource is capable of doing. But then you do start feeling like you're not freaked out when you walk onto a big set and you're like, oh, what? Oh, I didn't expect to see this. So it's not necessarily a stepping stone in terms of, I don't know that many kind of drama producers are going to look at you and go, oh, you've made commercials. Great. Let's come and do this. I don't think that those two worlds overlap. I think in one way, if you've done like a kind of sexy TV show, a commercials company might go, you look really great, come and do this. I never think it'll transition the opposite way. Or at least in my experience, nobody's ever said that. But yeah, I think it's more just every time we shoot, for me anyway, anytime I'm shooting anything, I learn something new. I think that's kind of an important way for me of working, that every time that I do something, I'm learning something from. And time on the floor doing it just makes you sharper for the next time.
One of the questions I was going to ask you was, over your career and even now, what actions do you take to make sure that you are still learning and taking something new from each experiences without leading the witness too much? Do you engage in any kind of reflection on projects or trying to figure out what worked, what didn't? Is it just watching lots of stuff, trying to figure out how things are lit? Are you going to expose? I suppose, what do you do to ensure you don't plateau?
I don't know is the honest answer. It's something that I have been thinking about a bit over the last while. I think that like for me, like trying to do a job that challenges me or try and bring challenge into the job. So like it's I'd never, just as a complete example, like I hadn't done lots of car stuff because it's very difficult to practice doing car stuff because you don't, it takes a lot of facility to shoot cars. But when it came time to do a show that had lots of cars in, I was like, okay, right, let's sit down and figure this out. So it was like, I spent a lot of time, yeah, watching things more to try and actually switch off as opposed to kind of analyzing it. I figured out a long time ago that if I sit down and try and watch anything as a way of looking at how it's made, I'll get really, there's no enjoyment in it. I'd like to watch stuff to enjoy it. And like, if you can have some critical analysis of it after the fact, then that's great. But I spend a lot of time kind of, even when I'm on a job, thinking about everything that's going on, walking the dog, running, and just actually thinking through things. And like, I find that for me works as a way of kind of processing stuff in my brain, because I think everything I learn kind of by osmosis and by staying kind of curious about things. I spend a lot of time like looking at stuff that have nothing to do with what I'm doing, but I think that influences what you end up working on. And a lot of the time like, it's things that like, I found that I haven't ended up on the wrong job where I haven't been able to have an idea of what's happening. But I try and keep challenging myself with how we lay out and do it. I don't know if that makes any sense, or is that's kind of.
Yeah, I think it makes perfect sense. And it's kind of a very broad, general kind of question. And I think everyone is going to have their own ways. I think the things that stand out there to me is this idea that challenging yourself or trying to bring challenge into a project, if it maybe isn't there initially, there's a sense of, I think that's how we learn, right? We push yourself a little outside your comfort zone, make mistakes, figure out how to fix them, go again. Now you know that, then you got to go and stretch yourself again somewhere. And then I'm definitely misquoting and misattributing this quote. I think it's Carl Jung, and said something like, the only good thoughts you have are while you're walking. And I think that sense of just going and disconnecting from the work and just letting it sit in your brain and trusting that it's in there and it's working, and the answer will come when you go to sit down and do that next piece of work.
Yeah, and like, like you said, like all the answers are there. Like you have them somewhere floating around in there, and they might not be the right one, but you'll figure that out pretty quickly and you're not doing it. I also think like the other thing to always remember is that you're actually never on your own in these things. Like, it's not an adversarial work environment. Everybody that's there wants you to do your best job. So be that the director, be that production design, be that me, the producers want to create an environment where you make something good. This is a long roundabout way of like, for me, when I go into a job, the most important thing is the triangle of like director, first AD, DP, because I'm part of that triangle. So it's the most important thing. And though like any corner of that triangle failing will make it much more difficult and more complicated. And that failure is like usually a interpersonal relationship thing. So like, if I'm struggling with something, I'll go to one of those two people, be it the director or be it the first, and go, what, I don't know. If someone's coming at you for answers to what, it's like, I don't know, give me a second and I will figure it out. But you need to give me 1 second. And I'll be like, oh, okay. So I think it's like, I always find just being honest about that really helps. Bullshitting your way through when you actually don't have a solution to the challenge that you've now found yourself in, you'll get found out really quickly. So if I'm ever shooting something I don't know what's going on or how it works or what the thing is, because people look to you for guidance and look to you like, as a DP, your role is to kind of be a bit of a leader. It's mostly a management position of all the kind of camera, grip, electrical. Everybody's kind of looking to you to go, what do you want to do now? Give me a second, I don't know. And if you actually say that as opposed to bullshitting, you get a lot more, sounds kind of out there, but you get a lot more positive energy that will help you do that. And like your first and your director And if you're a director, it's your DP and your first will be there, and your producer as well. Like everybody's pulling together. It's back to that thing of like, we're all on the same thing. We're all trying to go the same way. Let's all do it. So for me, to stop the kind of plateau feeling, introducing those challenges, but knowing I have that backroom support of everybody, and like having a great camera team, having a great electrical team, a great grip team, means that I'm kind of free to have those thoughts. And information, I absolutely devour as much information about what's happening as possible. I need to know everything.
So when you say devour information, do you mean in terms of like the communication between departments and making sure you know what everyone's up to, or something else?
No, that makes it sound kind of creepy, but more I need to know weird things like how far away when we're at this location of the toilet's going to be. And the first idea will go, why do you need to know this? I'm like, well, maybe one of my department will need to go to the toilet and there's nobody to change that over. So if it's a 10-minute walk, then we're going to be down tools for 20 minutes. So now I need to figure out if I can fill that 20 minutes with something positive, or are we just going to try and wear that? And they'll go, I hadn't really thought about that. So yeah, they're 5 minutes away. Okay, great. Thanks. So that kind of information I would really like because I find it just helps me process everything. So I go off and I think about it, and then I'm like, all right, cool. So we're here. All right, brilliant. Great. Now I know what's going to happen. And then I feel much more comfortable, and it takes away any of my anxiety about what's going on. And I'm able to kind of just sit down and figure it out.
Great. Perfect. Understood. Makes
I'm not
sense.
not creeping on everybody's, not trying to be in everybody's shit, just trying to figure out everything that's going on. Because I
Perfect.
think, again, I think if everybody's trying to figure, if I'm just siloed off in my own little thing, that's not helpful to anybody else.
Yeah. And I absolutely actually didn't mean like, are you just trying to snoop on everyone? I meant more of a broad perspective. So everyone's on the same page. But
Yes.
on the toilets type question, great question though, because someone may not have thought to ask that question. And it happened to me before, and the nearest toilets were 25 minutes away, and all of a sudden, cast member needs to go, and you've lost 50 minutes.
Yeah, it's a big deal. It's a big deal. And it's like, it's the more, we're all on kind of semi-continuous days now where you've got half an hour for lunch. And that's, it's great because you get home an hour, technically a normal work day's time back, but in film terms, an hour before you used to be able to. And like, I've got 2 young kids, so it means I get to go home and try and do bedtime. So I think it's great. But if you only got half an hour for lunch, like, life still happens within that time. And, yeah, it's just thinking about the whole process holistically really helps me.
Yeah.
And I'm just a person that's going to point the camera at the people that are talking. But if I can tune into, I can help fix problems once I know what the problems are. Because like sometimes things don't come to you until there may be a kind of costume issue that they're trying to keep away from director. And then, so it's all not out of badness, but they want to try and figure it out so they have a solution, because nobody wants somebody to come up to you with a problem with no solution. And that's, I think, human nature. You want to, and like when you get really good people, there'll be a problem for 2 hours and then they'll have worked it out and they'll come and go, the key costume has this rip in it, but we figured out that if we do this, it doesn't matter. But I found that, so there's a lot of stress for that department if they're figuring that out. But if you can find it out and you're like, oh, that's great. Well, I'm not going to shoot this scene. If the rip's on the bottom half, I'm not going to shoot below the waist. It's like, oh, great. So, problems shared is a problem halved. The story is the most important bit, not kind of making people feel bad because something bad has happened that they can't fix.
Yeah.
Like, if between a director and a DP, if you can fix it without that problem becoming a much bigger thing, then you should do that. Like, just being sound.
Being sound. Yeah.
It's very, very important, and it gets lost a lot. Not a lot. Sometimes it gets lost, but like working in film is a job like it's any other job. So, be nice to people because they will do their best work once you're being nice to them.
Yes.
You're not doing, I'm not saying it because there's a evil ulterior motive of you'll get more from people. It's more be sound because it's nice to be sound to people.
Definitely. And the job is hard enough. Like if you're on overnights in the rain and someone's a dick,
It's horrendous.
job gets harder. So
Yeah, and like it's a zero sum game because the more if somebody's a dick, you're not getting the best work out of the people. And like the one thing that we have in Ireland are some of the best crews in the world. So like help them, be nice, be humble about the fact that this is a wonderful, wonderful job, and don't lose sight of that. We're not mining lithium in, it's lovely.
yeah, and it should be fun, right? We're making films and television. That should be a fun job.
It really should, and there's kind of a thing that's always kind of in the back of my mind of like, if you're making something and there's joy in the people that are making it, that'll translate onto the screen. If everyone's miserable, it's going to feel miserable. There are very specific films that are miserable, and that's great, but we're oftentimes not making those things. So like, let's keep it all happy.
I couldn't agree more. I remember when you and Dermot were making Black Cab, and I was hanging around you like a bad smell for a good chunk of time.
Nah.
We had a conversation, and you had mentioned that I think it was the IFTA for Heartbreak 2017. You kind of mentioned that as a moment where you can nearly track when there was a bigger shift or a bigger change in your career and the work you were doing and what was coming after it. I was wondering if you could talk a little bit just about that and what you saw happen post that IFTA win.
Yeah, so I think that If to Win really kind of was the kickstart of kind of Dublin Old School happening, which I think was I really loved making that film. Really loved shooting it because it really was kind of a group of friends all working for the same thing. So like my focus blur on that job was Rua Megan, who I'd known since we were like 15. And he was pulling focus on this first proper feature film that I was doing. Gaffer was Addo, who had worked with for years doing commercials, and it was just felt like there was a huge family feel to set. So the making of it was beautiful. And when it kind of came out, I think that film was the thing that got me my agent. And then that kind of kicked in kind of the progression in terms of jobs. And it became kind of more serious, isn't it? Well, yeah, there were more stakes in the jobs that I was being offered and reading and meeting for. So I think that kind of really was kind of the beginning of the upward upswing. So that came out 2018, and then the kind of delay of that so like making it was 2017, came out 2018, and then the kind of meetings for jobs started kind of early 2019, and then I ended up doing kind of 3 features pretty much back to back, that were kind of meetings for those kind of definitely came off the back of Old School. So that was kind of the progression of it. And then kind of COVID obviously kicked in 2020, and then since then it's all been kind of TV stuff, TV dramas.
When it came then to making Dublin Old School, and you did Brightside with Ruth Meehan and Deadly Cuts with Rachel Carey and the Liam Gallagher doc.
I did another thing kind of in between. So the Liam Gallagher was kind of a short, for me it was quite a short shoot. I did another film that hasn't kind of finished yet. It was called Stranger with a Camera. But it was John Wallace was one of the producers on. But it's still, there's been back and forth about the edit.
Orla George,
Yes.
the sniper's daughter or something.
Called The Sniper's Daughter, I believe. Yeah. It's funny. A lot of them think Brightside was called Dead Happy. Black Cab is now, that we met on, has changed name a couple of times.
Nightcrawler, I think it's called now.
There's a new name now. It's called Stalker, I believe.
Okay.
Now it's hard for me to keep track mentally because I only remember the kind of working title of when we're shooting. Because you park that once you move on to the next thing, and then you're like, oh yeah, that's called something. Oh, so the names change.
I would imagine at that point in your career, moving into features must have felt very natural. But did that feel like a big leap, or was there anything that surprised you about the scale of going in and making a feature?
It felt very natural. I think because we had everybody working on that um, film had worked together before, so that family vibe really helped it. Because it meant that we were all very comfortable with each other, which was really helpful. Because for Dave and myself, it was the first time that we were shooting and directing a feature film. So yeah, it was kind of nervous trepidation before beginning, but then really when it began, it was like, oh, okay, so basically we're just making a short, but for 22 days as opposed to 3 days. So yeah, no, it felt really normal, and then kind of going on to do the bright side. There was nothing about that again, it just all felt very natural. Like that's what I mean about kind of the industry kind of. I know it sounds terrible to keeping you in the place that you are and not progressing, but that's kind of the thing that I mean. Like it'll feel right when you get to that thing. If you're like, maybe it's just my own mental block, but like I never want to walk onto a job and feel scared because I know that I won't be able to do my best work. So it's always felt quite. I haven't, you get this nervous feeling or slight anxiety level of like that imposter syndrome kicks in. You're like, well, if I walk out here and I don't know what I'm doing, this is it. And then you actually get into work and you're like, oh, oh yeah, okay, great, yeah, oh, I do know what I'm doing, brilliant. So yeah, it's that it didn't feel scary. Now that like at the time was like the biggest thing I'd done. And then going forward from that, when you go into like a job like 4 years later, you're like, oh, okay, right. Yeah, this is bigger than that. And then you do another thing and you're like, oh, right. So it's like that progression happens. But for me, like that kind of stuff never really, it doesn't overly interest me because when I get onto set, the circle gets really small because it's like the people that you're brushing up against. The bigger circus of the shoot doesn't really kind of um doesn't have a it doesn't resonate with me because it doesn't change what I'm doing. If you have lots of facilities, that's great, but again, like I'm talking like we were saying about the shorts, if you have a camera and great cast and a director and an idea, that's more important. All the rest of the stuff that expands the world out is great, but it's very necessary for making it better, but it's not the be all and end all, if that makes sense.
Totally. Did TV then feel very much the same, just like the same challenge scaled in a different way again when you moved into that world?
Yeah, I think so. Like, I think the thing about TV was that, yeah, the scale ups, but the time goes down. So there's the pressure cooker is kind of inverted a little bit. Like, and not that you have a huge amount of time when you're making kind of low budget films, but you feel that I get that, my work is always in collaboration with somebody else. So I know that directors have different feelings about it, but I'm very used to collaborating because it's not like I dictate what the shots are. It's a conversation between me and the director. But when it turns into TV and that conversation widens out a bit more to bring in kind of execs and people or you're picking up a look that's already pre-established, but it doesn't ever. What's the words I'm looking for? The scale and it didn't feel any weirder, and the need to kind of justify your existence, like not existence, but your job, it was the thing that was more present. So like, when you go into a feature, sometimes you're attached earlier on, but when you go into TV, you are interviewed and you're brought in and then you are definitely working for somebody. So like, you get brought into a feature because you have a vision for what the film could be. TV, yes, similarly, but it's a vision that needs to check boxes with other people as well. So, but that's okay. That's part of the job, is to be able to collaborate, be able to listen. I don't know any better than, we don't mind to say what this should be. The people that are paying for it probably have an idea of what they would like it to look like. So let's listen, because you're never gonna win if you're trying to like tell the tide not to come in. If they want it to look that way, it's going to look that way. You just need to know if you're going to be there. I'd prefer to be there because I can have a conversation about it and maybe, and say, well, I understand this is what you're thinking. Have you thought about this? And sometimes they might go, that's actually a really interesting way of, yeah, shoot it that way. Thanks. And you go, brilliant, let's go.
When it came to TV, you touched on a couple of things there I'd love to ask you about. One being now having to go in and meet and pitch or sell yourself, or sell maybe a vision that the director who's booked, versus coming in and picking up a second block or a second season of a show. I'm guessing that was a new experience when you were starting to take meetings like that. And I was wondering if you could talk about what the learning curve in that process was like, from when you first start taking those meetings and having to go in and figure out the best way of presenting yourself and your work.
Yeah, so it's funny, the meeting. So I've done a good few meetings over the last while. I always find them really beneficial because I try and get something out of them myself. But none of the meetings that I've ever done has been the same as the next one. They're all very different things, and different environments. So, and like, a meeting is just a nice way of calling it a job interview, really. And what I always try and do is just be as honest as I possibly can, within reason. Because I don't think, if I think once you kind of get your feet under the table, you can, if there's things in the script that you're like, I don't really get that, I don't think you should open the meeting with that, because that's probably not going to go down very well. But I think once you actually get in there and kind of talk about it and go, oh, okay, now I understand why it's like that, or I still don't really think that's great, what do you think about, just because what's written in the script is going to influence the way we shoot it. So let's talk about that. So like always, my stance is coming from the kind of visual storytelling element of what the script is. And I just like to be able to have conversations that are quite open about those things. So with interviews and meetings, I think it's really important that it's almost like a speed dating session with all the people that are there, because if the people on the other end of the meeting are talking to you, they are going to be part of the process. And a lot of the time, if it's like a television job, that could be 3 months, that could be 5 months, which is a long time. And it's quite a pressurized working environment. So for me, I need to know that I can speak freely to those people and not be afraid to air what needs to be said from my perspective of what we're making, because it can be a thing of like, I don't think we can do this. That sounds very negative. It's more the case of like, right, you've got one entire script is set in a car that's driving on the M50. I don't, unless you have a very good plan for that, I'm going to tell you that that's going to take twice as long as you have scheduled for it. And I don't want to put myself in a position where I'm going to stand up and go, yeah, we can do that in 5 days, because we can't. So I'm going to tell you my take on it, but I'm going to be really honest about it. And I need to feel that I can be honest about it, because if I can't be, then we're going to have problems for 5 months, which is going to make me stay up all night. And that's not going to be great. So maybe we shouldn't do it. And then it's all about, I ask as many questions as I feel that I'm able to ask. Who's your designer? Who are the people that you have already gotten involved? Because I think, sometimes you could have a show where a designer is on before the director. You could have a locations department that are on, and by the people that they say or the things that they touch on, if you're like, okay, great, we're in a safe pair of hands here. So for me, I try and get as much out of that process as I possibly can. In terms of pitching myself, I just try and be me and just try and have a very open conversation. All scripts are different. A lot of the times there's an expectation to have a kind of pitch deck made, which sometimes it's funny, like when I read a script, sometimes that can happen in like 2 hours because you're like, right, I know exactly. I try and write something just about how I feel about the visuals of the show, where it is. It's kind of like I always call it like a kind of kickoff discussion document because it's very much the opening. Because sometimes you meet with people and they don't know what they want the show to be yet. They don't know what they want the film to be. Less rare in films, more always in TV, because I think a director that's gone through the process of making a film has an idea of where it is because they've been sitting with it for a lot longer. But in terms of TV, yeah, it's like, can you put a mood board together and you go, yeah, okay, cool, brilliant. The meeting's tomorrow. And you're like, well, right, okay, so I got to read 3 scripts, got to think about it, and I have to make a mood board. I'm also on a job right now, so I might not get to do that. I'm like, oh, okay, well, it'd be great if you did. So you stay up all night, you might put the thing together. So it's a process of that. A lot of the time, they have either seen your work before you're in the room, so to speak, even though they're all Zoom meetings, they're very rarely actually in the room. So they're aware of what you've shot, but then at a later stage, which is always when it's going up the chain of like whoever the kind of commissioning network are, they want to see something. So you have some clips ready to go and send them over. But the initial kind of pitch, it's like the last job I did 2 meetings, there was one which was kind of two producers that are Irish based and exec, and one of the Irish based execs and producer. And then the secondary meeting was brought in the American tier of execs, which was so, but they were a lot more kind of less structure isn't the right word, but there was a kind of questions and answers flow to it where I would ask some questions in the beginning meeting, so the second meeting was much more them asking me questions about what I would do and then throwing kind of hypothetical scenarios at me and going, oh, well, in that scenario, I would do this. But like they're, I find them fine. They are slightly nerve wracking before you do them because you sit there and you go, oh, you're in the little Zoom pre-meeting thing where it's like the host is about to let you in. You're like, oh, fuck, am I going to fuck this up? And then I just yeah, I just try and be honest. Because it sounds, I don't want it to sound um arrogant, but I think, if it's the right job, then it will happen. But if you go through the meeting and it's not gone well, you probably shouldn't be doing the job because it's all a personality based thing.
Yeah, and look, I think at the end of the day, if you're in the room, you can do the job. Everyone knows you can do it. Otherwise, you wouldn't be there. So your currency is yourself, I'm guessing, in that space then.
Yeah, because I think like I genuinely think that the most important thing is that you can get on with the people that you're about to work with. And like I've gotten to the place in kind of meetings for stuff where you've gotten very close to getting it, and there's just one thing that maybe the other person has done something that sits better with the network, and you're guessing that because you're like, oh well, I thought it went really well. You get a really nice mail from like the producer going, like I met for a film that was shooting here, American film. I thought the script was good fun. I was like, you know what, I'd actually really like to do it. I had a lovely meeting with the director producer, and I was like, oh, that was really nice. That was lovely. And then they kind of didn't get back for a little while, and I'm like, I didn't get that. And then I got a really lovely email from them that was like, really wanted you to do it, but it was a sequel. And I was like, really sorry, but the DP that did the second one, this was going to be the third film in the process, has actually become available and they know the world. So it's just so much quicker. But like, if they weren't, we would have loved you to have it. I'm like, yeah, that's kind of fair enough. I get it. I would have loved to do it, but it didn't happen. So like, yeah, there's sometimes just the world just kind of goes, yeah, that's not for you. So you got to keep focusing. And like, you could you could get really downhearted and get kind of like, you could beat yourself up quite psychologically, like toughly, because you're like, oh, nobody wants me. They didn't want me. And the reality is that there's like so many other factors. It's not just you yourself. So like, dealing with that rejection in a way that you can turn it into something positive. That's what I need to do to kind of get through it, because it's going to happen all the time. Like, I can be shooting something and have an idea and try and go, here, what if we do this? And the director's like, I hate that. Don't do that. And you're like, well, that, I thought that was great. All right, let's do your idea then. Fine. Yeah, that's not great. All right, let's do it. Fine. But yeah, like, you have to deal with that rejection, because it happens, it happens all the time. And it's, unless you need to deal, like, get a coping mechanism for it, because it's tough. And like, for me, I personally absolutely hate, like, small talk, and I hate going to those kind of events and talking shite. I just can't do it. So selling myself is just completely alien. So I don't know how, I don't know how to do it. And it makes me really uncomfortable, because I know that there is an aspect of that I need to keep doing, because it's part of the thing. But I just prefer to, like, if someone just rang me up and said, "Oh, do you want to come do this?" Yeah, I would. Okay, great. Let's see on Tuesday. That would be the ideal scenario. That sometimes happens, but yeah.
If I may, one, thank you for sharing all of that. Really insightful. And my question was going to be, you mentioned coping mechanisms for rejection and how you deal with it. You mentioned you try and take something positive from it, but I was wondering what your kind of mechanisms are for dealing with those moments now. Have you got better at handling them over the years? Do they hurt any less? I probably think no, because I don't think they ever stop hurting, but you can maybe get over them quicker, or how do you manage it?
Yeah, I don't know. I think it is just, things definitely sting when they don't land. I think that's always going to be the case. I think that's human nature, because for me anyway, like, if I've realized over time that, again, and not that, I don't want this to sound kind of entitled or anything, but like, me to want to go and do a job, I have to really want to do it. I always need to do jobs. Everyone needs to work because they've got bills to pay. But in order for me to kind of give up, time away from my family and time away from the life that I live, because it doesn't matter if it's a job that's away or if it's in Dublin or wherever it is, I'm not mentally here when I'm shooting something, because I'm gone. I'm out of the house for like 60 hours of the week, and when I get home, it's in my head rent free. So I'm in it all the time. So in order to kind of put that pressure on my family and myself, I need to really want to do the job to go through with it. So you get yourself in this state where you really want to do it, and then they don't want you. And it's like that teenage disco moment again of like, please, do you want to go out with my friend? And that doesn't happen. And you're like, oh, okay, right. So I think, like, yeah, it's kind of take the dog for a walk and have a chat with yourself for me. It really kind of helps. And then I kind of go, all right, what happened there? Where did that come off the rails? Is it my fault? And then I kind of go through that and figure it out and go, actually, no, it wasn't. Okay, they've just gone with the person that has had more experience doing that. So that's fine. It'll come. And then it's like, right, I need to figure out what I'm going to do now, because I need to get a job. So let's work towards that. So I think, like, you know, it's like all, I think it's like all challenges within work. And that's part of the thing where you're asking about, like, how do you bring a challenge into something? I personally love restriction within work, because I think if you have so much opportunity to do whatever you want, you can absolutely spiral into a decision anxiety. Oh, if it's like, oh, I can put the camera here or here or here or here or here, I can look this way or that way, then you're like, I don't fucking know what to do. Whereas it's like, right, you can't look at that. That for me is a perfect starting place of like a creative restriction that makes you more creative, because once you're set with challenges, it makes it you do better work. So it's the same exact thing for like, okay, job just said no to me. Right, now I need to that's gone. Now I need to figure out this. Let's sort it out. So yeah, I don't know if there is a way, but of getting to a place where it's never going to hurt, because I think it always will. But I think it's that ego smash that hurts. But the practical side of you goes, okay, I understand what that is. That's just a thing that happened. Now move on, park it. It's a great thing, which is like always look forward, only ever glance back. And I think that's kind of within all of this is the only way to do it. And there's bigger problems than me not getting a job. There's loads of shit going on in the world. So bit of perspective has really helped.
Okay, deadly.
And having a dog.
So let's say you book a job. How do you start to prep? Do you have like a process or a ritual or steps you kind of take, or is it dependent on the director that you're going to be working with and kind of what they're thinking and how you start building the look of the show or the film?
Yeah, so it's a two-pronged approach mentally for me anyway. And yeah, so in one part there's my own self-preparation, if that makes sense, which is where I want to read the script and understand every aspect of it and kind of know it inside and out. Because once I have that, I know, so I'll read it and figure out what's going on and get my own take on everything, and then let that kind of filter through and sit in it. So that's my own bit of prep, because that then enables me when having discussions with people about stuff of like, yeah, but that needs to be here because they take it from there later. And it's like, oh, okay. Oh, you read the script? And you're like, yes, I did. Excellent. That always makes me feel really smug. But so that's the kind of one stage of prep. And then the other one is the kind of outward prep where you're talking to everybody else. And yeah, that really, really depends on different directors. So what they want from the process and how best it works for them. So invariably, my prep is probably too short. Um, so you try and get as much time as you can, but by the time I get in, the director is getting, especially if you're setting up a new show, the director is getting dragged every which way all over the fucking place. So actually trying to get FaceTime with them can be quite difficult. You normally figure it out and normally get away doing it, but they're going all over the place, and hair, makeup need them, costume need to show them this, design want to show them this. So my way of dealing with that is just kind of tagging along and like trying to go, oh, here, I'll drive, and then you talk while you're driving, or you're scouting stuff, and you're kind of, so yeah, it's an evolving thing, but it really depends director to director. And like some people, you get the look of a show when you have a little bit more freedom from studio and network. In terms of deciding a look, you can get to it really quickly. And it's like, okay, we know what it is. It's going to look like this. And you have one key image and go, this is the tonal reference for the show. And they go, great, love it, thank you. Or there's a much more convoluted one where you have people that need it, or nervous isn't the right word, but there's a lot more stakes involved and a lot more stakeholders that they want to see everything. So you have to make a massive presentation about it's going to be this environment will be this. So that needs a lot more work. But for me, it's always like an evolving conversation with the director, and the designer and costume, everybody. Like everybody has skin in the game, so to speak. So trying to include as many people as possible, so we're all going the same way, all doing the same thing. So that's the kind of more artistic end of it. The other end of it is then, because I've learned the script and had those conversations with the director, I can sit down with the first and we can talk through what we're doing. And that for me is one of the most valuable moments. So like the making of the film or the show is in the schedule. And being able to be kind of frank about like, yeah, we don't need, so a lot of the time, within TV jobs, they have a goal page count for every day, which is normally like 6 pages. So if you put in for a day in your schedule that only has 2 pages on, pretty quickly you'll get like a knock on the door from like producer, line producer going, what's the story here? Day 15, you've only got 2 pages. And you're like, yeah, that's the bit where, I don't know, there's a massive car crash. And you're like, oh yeah, that'll probably take you a bit of time. Okay, yeah, fine, thanks. But being able to have that thing, that relationship with the first, where the two of you can kind of sit down and go, and the director as well. It's not an exclusionary process, but it's just sometimes I might have half a day where the director is casting, which I generally aren't involved in, and I might go, right, I'm going to go and hassle the first and see what they're thinking, and kind of sit down and go, yeah, that day just isn't going to work because we will never get all of that shot. Or the flip side of it is, I think although that has 8 pages on that day, the way we've been talking about doing it, I think we could probably get another strip in there. So I kind of get my oar in, probably too much. I don't know. I'd leave that for the firsts to say, but I just find it really, I find it very beneficial to know, and that's the whole thing of like knowing what's going on. So being part of that conversation means you know what's going on, so you can kind of prepare mentally for what's happening and juggle it out and kind of throw the crazy ideas at people and see what sticks. Because like once you're like, prep is the cheapest time you have of all your shooting, and it's also the most time you have to figure stuff out. Because when you're on the floor and you've got a lot of time-based pressure on you, you don't really have a time to have a creative chat or try and problem solve something. So like having that solution already there in the box to go, here's one we made earlier, this will fix that, is really helpful. So it's just kind of building up that toolkit. So yeah, once you start talking about the visual language for the show with the director, and you kind of, sometimes it really helps, as opposed to dig into specifics, because if you're doing 3 or 4 episodes or something, or like say Blackshore, which I did with Dahi Keane, we did all 6 episodes over 13 weeks. So it's just, we can't practically talk about absolutely everything. And then also as you're shooting script, there'll be script revisions and scenes might get replaced. So, and you don't have a chance to tear yourself away. So it's like, okay, right, let's broad strokes talk about what the world is we're building. Let's talk about what frames that we resonate with us for where we are story wise. And then you can quickly call that up. But the honest answer is every director and every project is different, which is great, because it would get really boring if it was a one size fits all answer to that. But yeah, prep is definitely the most important thing, because it's a time where you can have answers, and you can also kind of ask questions that you may not know the answer to. But because when you get on the floor, you need to have the answer for everything, and have the time planned out to be able to do it. So it's very important.
I like what you said, which was that the show or the film is kind of made in the scheduling of it. And Jer, who you mentioned earlier, had said when he was on, a bad prep is ultimately going to be a bad shoot. At that point, do you, like in TV, maybe not, but do you get a chance to go out and do camera tests or test lenses and make big decisions like that in that process?
Yes. Long story short, yeah. Like you find it depends on, yeah, like sometimes directors might be like, I don't really care. Tell me what you think is good and sell it to me. And then you kind of have a little bit of a kind of, you have an idea in your head of what format and what lens choice you want to go with. Like I think you should, for me anyway, I like to try and keep on top of what stuff looks like. Either by looking at something and going, oh, I look at that stuff, figuring out what the package was and going, yeah, that's cool, that would work. Or knowing what the limitations of, it's a tricky one, because you go into it with like a kind of blue sky thinking of like, right, let's go IMAX. And then you very quickly realize that, no, yeah, oh, it's not that. But what I mean is like the budget isn't there. So you get for me, I like to get a read on what that's going to be. So you're not asking for something that's completely, I want that Kubrick lens that went to space. So it's like, right, what, let's be honest with each other. What have we got? And then I can, because there's no point in me there's no, if you have to ask the price, you can't afford it, is not a true thing in this world, because we need to know, because we need to budget it out. And is this returning show is this going to be, so therefore are these things going to be available in the future? So like you think of the practicalities of it, which is a terrible way to get into a creative endeavor, but it's the reality of it. So yeah, we actually did tests for Witness Number 3, originally myself and Dermo, because he's definitely a director that wants to see what we're going to be shooting on. And then we made a decision on a certain set of lenses, on like a vintage Soviet set that were rehoused, that were in Belgium, that they were Lomo super speeds. And they're beautiful. They look really good and they suited the show. And then they, like a week out, they fell through. So like we tested those like 4 weeks out, week -4, I think, week -3, I can't remember. And Dermo was like, I love these. These are the look. And I was like, right, brilliant, let's do it. Cool, excellent. And then they just disappeared. And I was like, uh-oh. And annoyingly, like, they never called the director about that. They'll call, like, the rental house would call you and you're like, oh, thanks, brilliant. So you go in and you're like, hey, remember those things? You fell in love with it? Yeah, we can't have those. So here's what we can have. Like, in fairness, actually, I'm happier with where we ended up visually with that show. But it was in a much more attainable lens set. Because they're mine, and they're red Pro Primes, which are like, which you can actually pick up a set for unbelievably cheap now, which is just crazy to me, to be honest with you, because they're a very clean set of lenses that you can fuck up later with loads of filters. So like, yeah, there is time to have a look at those things. Sometimes it's, when there are specific things required within the scripts, it's good to try and test those things. So like, be that kind of a rig, or be that something, or a lot of it is like a conversation and looking at reference stuff. So sometimes like the lens decision, yeah, you can pull stuff up and go, it's going to look like this, but here it is in a rental house that's not really been lit. I don't know what it's going to look like when we get it. Well, I do, but I can't show you what it's going to look like when we're shooting out here in our location, which looks like this. So it's very useful, but it's more, I think the test is more to like feel the character of it, so to speak.
Yeah.
But yeah, in terms of cameras, you can test all the formats in the world, but they're all in different price brackets. So and same with the lenses. There's been some like moments of looking at stuff where, and it's been like kind of showed like shot, and somebody, like, I did blocks off and somebody else did blocks, and we were going to change lenses from one series to the next, and it was like, oh, that, yeah, okay, great. And it was like, yeah, we can totally get those. And then it was like, well, that's triple the camera budget, so for the lenses alone. And it was like, oh, yeah, we're probably not doing that. Okay, let's just stick with where we are, thank you. So yeah, it's prep is really good time for like practical stuff like that, and going, oh yeah, so here's what it'll look like if we do this. And sometimes that's just a matter of like talking to your grip and going, here, we want to do this. What's that? What is that? And then I'll go, oh yeah, hang on a second. I'm usually more often than not sounding like all people within all departments were like, I did that on this show. And you're like, I thought we were being original. It's like, no, I did that 15 years ago. Like, oh, great. Okay, yeah, do you have a thing? It's like, yeah, of course. Took loads of photos because it was really original, because that was the first time it was ever done. You guys are ripping it off. Like, so yeah, it's great for that, but it's just a matter of, you have time to have those chats and explore that. But there's no one size fits all in terms of, it's totally normal to have a day of projected lens tests. It would be great if you did, but more often than not, it's a time and money thing and getting them in. So yeah.
Is there, or have you found, does your work change in any way when you are, instead of setting up a show, coming in to shoot something that's already been established, like I think Harry Wild and Keane, where there is a feel and a texture to those shows, and you got to come in, I'm guessing, and work within that palette?
Yes and no is the honest answer. So like, if you're setting up a show, I think within, the first week is always an absolute shit show, regardless of what's happening. Is a Woody Allen always reshoots the first week, like intentionally, or somebody. Maybe it's not Woody Allen. I don't know. The so like, oh, the first week, it's like I really wish we're not doing that in the first week because it's gonna be shit. So oh, by the end of week two on a show that you set up, the look is pretty established, and then you are just replicating yourself throughout that. So I think with where a show has a look, you're you talk about it loads beforehand, and then when you actually get on the floor, you're like, right, now I need to make it look like this. So they both have challenges. In one, you're like, right, almost sometimes like being a tribute band can be more difficult than playing your own songs. Because you're playing your own songs, you're like, oh, well, I'm just gonna go and do this. Whereas when you're like covering somebody, you're like, I really gotta fucking make sure that it looks like exactly that. But I'd say always by like the end of the second week, you're like, okay, that's fine. You don't have, when the look is established, there's a lot less conversation about what it's going to look like, which means you can focus actually on figuring out how you're going to do it, which is really helpful. But it's kind of, they're both as fun as each other, if that makes sense. Like I personally don't know, I don't have a preference for either. I enjoy both of it because it's kind of interesting to walk into something and go, right, how do we get in there? And like, using the kind of Canning's example, or like other jobs where I've gone in like for a day to do like crossover cover for a DP. So like sometimes DPs will do 2 blocks of a TV show, but they'll need to step off to go and do tech recce's and stuff or prep. Um, so you're like literally jumping onto a moving train and doing a day at the end of a block, which is really established and the whole world is there. And you're like, and it's a show that you haven't seen because it's like the first series. And you're like, oh, what does the show look like? And they're like, oh, no one sends you the crap quality rushes on thing. Like, no, I haven't seen anything. And the director's like, you don't know what it looks like. I'm like, no. Oh, okay. Right. Well, there you go. But you very quickly realize that there's a whole team of people that do know that. So like your gaffer, if there's a B camera, they've been framing it and they'll be like, yeah, it's more like this. The focus puller will be like, yeah, normally we'd be on a 32 mil here. And you're like, good, thanks, man. Yeah, never above the 85. And normally it's like T2. You're like, nah, you're lying about that bit. It's wide open. So yeah, it's you're jumping on a moving train, or they're all different circumstances, but you get very used to it. And also it's that thing of like nobody wants you to fail, so just enjoy it. I think sometimes that can be more difficult for a director than it can be for a DP, especially if it's like under the block system and you're coming in to a cast that are all, especially if it's like a returning series and they're on like series 2 or series 3 and they have cast that have had 3 different directors and they know their character already. So it's like, well, my character would never do that. You're like, oh, I thought you would. Whoops. So like with me, at least I have a whole team of people that are, they're kind of whispering in my ear about what the right thing to do would be, whereas directors will be just with the cast. And that's a much more, challenging scenario, I think.
Mm.
Trying to make stuff look like it already does.
We've talked about prep. So can you talk about the process of being on set then? And maybe it's just a case of that, well, that's where the fun part of the thing happens. But is there, I'd love just your sense of what that aspect of the job has been like for you and what that collaboration, you mentioned that triangle, I guess, of working with director first and yourself as the DOP, what that then becomes like when you all hit the floor.
Yeah, so the shooting is kind of, for me, the fun, it is the funnest part because it's also at the beginning the kind of nerve-wracking part because you have a lot of theory and it's all highly theoretical until you actually get it on its feet. That's funny, like a lot of the time the things that you're most worried about in terms of scenes, uniformly when you talk to or when I have conversations with firsts and directors, it's like, yeah, you spend a whole day talking about a certain scene And then when you actually get on set and start shooting it, you're like, oh, that one, that was fine. It's the one we didn't worry about that's the absolute banana skin. So yeah, no, the shooting process is just a joy actually seeing it kind of come to life and it all clicking and all the stuff happening. I work a lot with the same or similar crew within kind of camera department. And it's just always just a kind of lovely thing of, like they're my mates essentially. So having that kind of network and support system there is really wonderful. Um, Sometimes we can be too familiar, which leads to interesting returns of um me getting told to get back in my box, which is great as well because I think it's kind of I think it's important that the set is the most nobody should be afraid to kind of speak up. Um, because good ideas can come from any place, and like I always kind of encourage, and I think directors instinctively do listen to opinions that are coming at you from all places because I don't I don't you know I don't understand how you know for me I can jump onto a job, prep, shoot, and then I'm done, and then I can be going on to the next one incredibly quickly. So my work rate and turnover of shooting scenarios is relatively high compared to a director's who would be like prepping for a good bit out, shooting, and then in the edit for a long time. So how they, the theoretical level of what they're shooting is a lot higher. The ratio is a lot higher than, and for me, the shooting crew, their working ratio is a lot higher than mine. So like those ideas that come in from the weirdest of places can often get you out of a bind really quickly. So like listen, invite those opinions. Now obviously there's time, people need to know the right time to do it, not just rocking into a director's rehearsal and going, that wouldn't happen. Um, but if you get stuck, there's a network of people there that have answers if you just listen to them or just ask them or just like, standby props have great ideas of things that because they've been on loads of jobs where they've seen this happen before. And, I think like perspective on the world and inviting as many perspectives in as possible makes the show much more rounded. So yeah, I don't know if that answers the question, but my approach is to get in there and kind of be as present as possible and, you know, just keep talking to as many people as possible as we're shooting kind of and listening as much as possible as well. And like, I always try and have as kind of, I kind of love working with cast as well, kind of, I don't know, in a weird way, it sound, doesn't sound right, but it's more, I don't have a kind of standoffish relationship with cast because I've come up doing a lot of jobs that were handheld where you end up being the last person, as the closest person to the action that is happening. And I really enjoy that, being the closest thing to it. And that's why I operate myself and I really like that because it means I'm in the thick of it and I can be very quick to make decisions because I'm kind of seeing things as opposed to being stepped off, removed from what's happening. That's a rambling answer to a very simple question, I think.
No, it's a great answer. Do you worry about or think about time when you're on set?
Yes, I do. I don't worry about time. So my job, or what I see my job is to shoot what's happening. Absolutely. But it's to create an environment where the director and the cast have as much time as possible to do what they need to do, which is perform and then direct the performance and then perform. So my kind of work mentality is to try and safeguard that time as much as possible. So if things are going to take a while to be set up, I try and get them done ahead of time. So that's what I'm talking about in terms of scheduling with the first is like, I will know from what, there's hour and a half's worth of lighting work for that scene. But if you can take me out to hear that work can happen while we're shooting this, so everything will flow together. So I love to be able to have, and sometimes that doesn't work, and sometimes it's like, right, we're going to need to stop for 20 minutes while we lay this wonderful track. So everyone needs to be on board with that. But I try to safeguard that time as much as possible by not being, by being as efficient as possible. And a lot of that happens within prep. So I'm very aware of time, but also very aware that the most important thing is what we shoot. So people need time to be able to do that. And again, that's all about the efficiency of coverage, which we kind of talked about, the efficiency of all of the departments that I talk to working together and having as much information as possible. So having that info and everybody pulling together and working for the same thing and knowledge means it gets as efficient and streamlined as possible, which means there's more time for the cast to do it. Because sometimes, like, we can try and make it as scientific as possible, or make it as kind of craft based as possible, but there still is the magic of somebody actually standing up and delivering something, which is what you are trying to capture, and what the reason why everybody gets involved is to hear those stories from a human perspective. So if you make it into a sterile environment, that won't come through. So you need to have all of the things helping to make that, capture that magic, because there's no telling when it's going to come, and you can't order it like a delivery. It will just arrive. So you need to make the world as welcoming to that little bit of performance magic as possible, and then let it happen. And that's kind of all of the things that we've been talking about are all about that. That's the core of why you do it.
Everything in service of that.
Essentially, yeah.
What is, in your opinion, is the hardest thing about being a cinematographer?
The hardest thing about being a cinematographer? Oh, that's a really interesting question. I think it's the kind of self-doubt is something that I kind of try and figure out a lot, and I've kind of tried to a lot of the time you're put in scenarios where you don't know, and maybe that's just me by my own choosing, but you don't know. You're like, I think this is going to work really well. You deep down, yeah, you've ticked the boxes, but the imposter syndrome bit kicks in. You're like, if I don't know, and what if this doesn't work, and what happens where is that the right thing? And I think that it's also it's a department where there's a lot of people that want to do it. So the competition, which I think is really healthy and really great, and we should have as many people in trying to do it as possible. But you end up doubting yourself a lot when you don't get a job or you don't get picked, because there's lots of really talented people that are trying to do the same job. And so I think the hardest thing is just trying to keep yourself mentally motivated to keep doing it, because it's a wonderful job. I think at the beginning, when you're starting out and you're trying to get stuff off the ground, you're trying to be part of stuff, everything is in your head, and you can't until you go and shoot a fight scene. Nobody will ever trust you to shoot a fight scene. Then once you've done it, you're like, oh, well, that's okay. Well, I knew I could do that. So it's very difficult to show your abilities as a DP without doing it, and nobody will take a chance on you, because you are an expensive part of the puzzle. Because the crew that you have, the stuff, it's a big risk, and especially when sometimes they like to have a safe pair of hands, they being kind of execs. So they're much less risk adverse with DPs than they might be within other departments, because they feel there's a feeling that the DP needs to be the kind of wise old owl that's been through it all. It's like, that's not true. What you want is somebody that has energy as well, and that there's somebody that's probably younger than me, that's better than me, that would do the job better, but they don't want to trust that thing to somebody else, which is kind of bullshit. So I think that there's loads of stuff that makes being a DP difficult, but that earning people's trust, I think, is probably the most difficult bit, which is wrong, because it's people need the opportunity to go and do it. And interesting voices, I think, can get lost when they don't want to trust them with it.
Yeah, I hear you. I think it's also looking at the UK, there's so much television drama, it's soap and continuing drama that's been lost over the last 24 months, that there's also just this massive reduction in production where people can go and try and learn and grow and break through some of those barriers by building trust on shows that still cost a lot of money, but the stakes maybe are slightly lower in the broadcaster's eyes because of what they are.
Yeah, 100%. And like, there's always this overarching desire to try and get someone that's 100% able to make their day. I think, like, I work really hard to counter that, like I've said, by trying to make days that are totally makeable, which seems like you're cheating, but I kind of don't see it like that. I think it's fair enough to go, well, I think we can make this, so if we don't, then it is on me, but give us a chance here. So, like, you could get somebody that's a really, really interesting DP that has an amazing ideas and wonderful vision, but because they haven't done something, like you're saying, like a continuing or like a soap or anything that hasn't proven that they can make their day, they're just immediately not in the conversation. I think that's kind of silly, because you need to take a bit of a risk, or because risk brings a huge reward always, like, and 9 times out of 10, it'll all be fine. Maybe once it might not work. So yeah, I think it's important to try and just widen that pool a little bit to try and get people that haven't had those opportunities to give them, if that makes sense.
Total sense. Is there anything that you haven't worked on yet that you would love to do, be that stylistically or work in a particular type of genre? What would be, if you could go and grab a project by the horns to challenge yourself and push yourself, what would that be?
Oh, that's a really good question. I don't not like the things that attract me to kind of projects, and like attract is a kind of funny term, because normally they come to you as opposed to you see, because it's difficult to find things. So like it could be a desire. My desire is always to try and find things that are really interesting stories that kind of look at the world in a slightly different way. So there's not one specific genre. I'm not massively genre led. Yeah, of course, there's things that I'd love to, do a highly stylized noir thriller, based in the future, but that's Blade Runner, so somebody's already made it. But you know what I mean? Like, it's that kind of genre that doesn't appeal to me. I think the treatment that you put on a story is the thing that kind of appeals to me. So like a good, really interesting story is what I'd like to do. I'm kind of, it'd be lovely to do a film, because I haven't done one for a while. Because I think there's kind of, I think you can, I've been lucky in kind of TV jobs where I've kind of had ones like Witness Number 3 or Black Cab Stalker, whatever it's now called, where we've kind of had a decent amount of freedom to try things and do things that are slightly outside the normal televisual storytelling language. And I think in films you have a little bit more opportunity to do that as well. So yeah, like it's more just I really love working, and it's kind of a desire to keep doing that and telling those stories, as opposed to anything specific in genre, like good scripts, but more importantly, kind of good people. It's always the kind of core people that are involved, producer, directors, that's kind of what latches me into being really interested in doing something. I think, so you see, scripts can be incredibly specific, but they can also be broad enough that they can go any which way. Because I'm sure everybody's read really interesting scripts that then when you see the finished piece, you're like, oh, that's not anywhere near what I thought it would be. And the same is opposite of like mediocre scripts that are done by incredibly interesting people that you're like, holy shit, that really is great. So it's kind of a mental investment in the people that are involved for me. That's the jumping off point. So really good scripts, amazing, but they have to be coupled with people that you're like, I will go to war with you because I trust you will have my back. And I think that you're going to be really interesting to do this.
Cool. Do you have any recommended resources or books or anything that you have consumed over your career that has been very helpful to you in any capacity?
Yes, I think so, but I don't know if they're the right answers. Like the thing that always kind of I think like being curious about the world is the world is a massive resource to go and actually just wander around and see life in different ways. Traveling, doing all that kind of stuff really helped me figure out how I'd like to see the world portrayed, if that makes sense. I think, you know, once you have that broad knowledge base, then you can localize it into different projects as you start looking at them. In terms of kind of um books and stuff, there's a great editing book which I hopefully have very close by, but maybe not. It's the Sergei Eisenstein book, um, which is wonderful because it talks about like the kind of different types of cut, not just narrative, you know, geographic, all the different kind of things, which is if you're making kind of emotionally led storytelling is really useful to understand why that works. Um, so yeah, that was always, and then the Bresson book, Notes on a Cinematographer, which always gives you incredibly good one-line quotes that make you look really smart. Um, that's really helpful. I bought like an original copy of it off like Amazon 18 years ago or something, and then I gave it to somebody to put in an art project library that he built in Donegal, which is a whole different story. Um, and then I was like, I really want to get that book back. And I went on like Amazon or something and realized that the original copy pressings of the book had gone up to like 500 quid each because everybody wants one. It's been reissued so you can get them, but it's not just, I'm being slightly facetious when I say it gives you great quotes to use in meetings and when you kind of interview for jobs and say gnomic wisdom, but it also gives you really good basis to challenge yourself in how you think about films, how you think about where the camera is within films. So like there's a great one which I always think of, which is like the camera is there by invitation, not by design. When you actually boil down what that means, it's like instead of basing your entire scene about how the camera, like playing it to the camera, let's make it so it's invited in, so it's observing what's happening. So just little things, like really quick things you can read and go, oh, once you actually think about it and start kind of processing it, you're like, right, oh, I hadn't thought about it like that before. So I've always found those two books really, really helpful. The Film Sense is the name of the Eisenstein book.
Like,
Notes on the Cinematographer by Bresson.
so my last question,
Yes.
were you a skater?
Not very good.
How did Ill Street, your sole directorial credit, as far as I can tell, come to be?
So there was a really good friend of mine who was a producer called Dave Lee, who was one of the producers on Dublin Old School, and we worked together kind of doing little bits and bobs, and he produced some shorts that I shot. And we're still really close. He was making, was pitching the film for Hill Street around, and he kind of sent me I'd actually worked on as like a camera loader, I think, on like the original promo that he'd shot while I was still in college. He was still trying to get it off the ground. It was a passion project for him, and he sent me over the treatment for it. And he was like, "Will you have a look at that and tell me what you think, and like make any notes or change it around? Just I want to try and get it off the ground again." So he sent me the treatment, and I punched it up a little bit. And then he was like, "Oh, great! Would you come and meet the?" He had like a researcher, kind of was one of the main subjects of it, who was given kind of his time to talk about it. And I showed up to the meeting like 5 minutes late. When I sat down, he introduced me as the director. I was like, Oh, okay. Oh, I guess I'm with Jason. So it was kind of like, it was because it's a documentary. I think it's a very different thing, but it was more. I'd made documentaries in college as part of my kind of fourth year. My fourth year final project was I shot, directed, and cut a documentary because that was um my way of being able to shoot something was by making it myself, if that makes sense. So I understood the format and the form, and I also kind of I had skated, but I wasn't very good at it. But I surfed, and I snowboard a lot now. I now skate a good bit, and it's kind of one of my main ways of getting around. Um, so I understood what the emotional feeling behind it was, and yeah, we just kind of, it was something that we kind of chipped away at together for a little while and ended up making a feature length documentary about the history of skateboarding in Ireland. But it was a while ago. So yeah.
Deadly. I'm just curious.
Yeah, it was one of those weird things that like, I think it was an interesting thing to do because what I realized was how difficult it is to be a director and how like, making a film is like, it's not in any way like having kids because that's a much more complicated thing. But if you imagine a film like a child that you kind of conceive it, and then the kind of the shooting of it is kind of like the whole time up until the leaving cert. So like, prep is the first bit, and then the secondary school is when like it smells for playing sound, but there's some blow ups, and that's the shoot. And I realized that as a DP, I get to kind of fuck off once the leaving's done. But as a director, you got to go through college and all the other stuff, which is actually kind of even more difficult. And it's got a really long tail and goes on for ages. So, like, it gave me a lot of perspective on what all of the directorial ends of making something are. And I said, I'm not doing that. I'm going to keep with the shooting stuff.
Well, I don't know. Maybe you would have made a brilliant director, but you make a fantastic DOP. So
Thank you. That's mainly because I surround myself with really, really, and this is the other thing, like, something that I do definitely want to say that, like, all my job is made so much more fantastically easier by having amazing crew that, and like anybody, I think, be it a director or anybody that works in the film industry that kind of takes sole ownership of a piece of work's brilliance, I think is kind of fibbing a little bit. It takes a village to make a film or a TV show. It's a huge group effort. And like, I'm always in awe of the people that I'm surrounded by when I'm working. Not just, right the way ADs, third ADs, trainee ADs, everybody, locations, the whole people, the amount of people that come together to bring, somebody that sits in a room and writes something on a page, and then all of a sudden you've got 100 people that are bringing trucks up the side of a mountain, and you got all this a huge amount of shit going on. And like my job is to kind of manage that and steer that in the right direction. But everything that ends up on screen it's a massive group effort. So thank you. But there's a huge amount of people that are part of that.
couldn't agree anymore with that sentiment as well. And kind of just goes back to, I think, one of the first things you said, which is in my mind very visual, the idea of everyone pulling together. I always think of it as like a boat, and if everyone has an oar, they all need to be going in the same direction. If even one is going in the opposite direction, it slows everything down, or there will inevitably be problems. So, but yes, regardless of that, I think you have obviously built a team, and you're responsible as a HOD, I think, for the culture within that team and how people work and the fact that they can come together. So while I agree and very humble, but you are also very, very good at what you do, as anyone who has worked with you will attest to, and having seen you work, I can attest to as well.
Well,
So
thank you. I appreciate that.
thank you very much for talking to me, man.
Thank you for having me. It's been a pleasure.
And that's a wrap on JJ Rolfe. Thank you for listening to the Filmmaker's Playbook. If you're enjoying the show, please share it with a friend and follow and rate us on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. If you have feedback, questions, or topics you'd like me to cover on the show, please put them in the comments section on our Instagram page at the Filmmaker's Playbook Podcast. You can follow me on Instagram at Jason Branagan Director, and you can find JJ on Instagram at Rolfe JJ. Links and social media handles are in the show notes. Join me next week when I talk to acting coach Helena Walsh. Until next time.